Happy week of conference play. Welcome into Six Rotations alongside Mick Ellie. I'm Daniel Gillman, and we've got 1 weekend of conference play under our books and ready for more. As always, we are brought to you by SNA Sports, better equipment for a better game. And Mick, we ended last episode really wanting to know who can win the championship, who is going to start conference play looking like they're the best teams and the best, not just the best teams in their conference, best teams in the nation. We had great showings from the Kansas ESPN Bonanza in the reverse sweep from Texas, all the way up until Minnesota getting swept by Purdue, turning around and sweeping Wisconsin. What was your biggest takeaway of the beginning of conference play?
This is nuts. This whole season is nuts. I mean, this is the most fun for spectating volleyball that has ever happened in the United States right now. You have to tune in because you don't know what's going to happen. And just as Purdue pulled off one of the most fantastically, I won't say error-free, but well-played matches.
It was near perfect, right?
Yeah,
they
were so good. And then Minnesota turns around 2 nights later and just steamrolls Wisconsin right out of the gym. It is just something that you need to get a bowl of popcorn and sit down and get 4 TV sets going. And boy, you can't not see a good match.
Well, if you don't have time over the weekend, that's what we're here for. We're going to break down everything for you. Also talk about what is a dart throw of a top 10 for our AVCA coaches poll. We've got the top 25 for you. Not one team fell out of the top 25 this weekend. What does that tell you about the coaches and the way they vote? Plus a fantastic sister connection that we have for you at the end of the show. Ellie McKissock, libero at Florida, Matti McKissock, All-American setter from Georgia Tech, now at UCLA. We were able to chat with them before this weekend's matches, and we've got that for you coming around the corner. But first, Mick, I want to ask you this question before we get to the top 5. It includes a team in this top 5. So let me say, for the longest time, the border battle, Wisconsin, Minnesota, it was dominated by Wisconsin, but in my opinion, it was the toughest place to do the road trip to for a Big Ten team. You've got to go to Minnesota and then back that up the next day, do Wisconsin or vice versa. Has San Diego and BYU stolen that title because Pepperdine ran through that rough shot with a pair of 4-set losses?
Yeah, I don't know. You know, there's several of those. They're in each conference. I'll bet you the coaches could tell you what the 2 hardest ones are to go and play at. I know what it was in the Pac-12. I'm not sure what it is in the Big Ten, but I think that one's hard, especially when it's 20 below and snow is flying. I mean, that's got to be just tougher than all get out. And I think the ACC has some of those battles also.
Well, what was the toughest when you were coaching in the Pac-12?
Well, going to Washington and then having to jump on a plane and going to the Palouse for Washington State match the next day was almost the toughest one. But the Colorado to Utah back-to-back was even tougher because you were dealing with altitude. So those 2, I think, stick out in the Pac-12 coaches' minds as much as any out there. I think the Big Ten is doing a lot of private plane flying, and I don't think it's as tough. You don't want to do private planes around mountains, and the Pac-12 has stayed away from private planes because it's pretty dangerous. And there are a lot of people.
Happy Valley is very scary to fly into with a charter flight. I'll tell you that.
I've driven in there.
Moving forward, you got to imagine every weekend now, USC or UCLA may have to deal with flying across the country starting in a few years. But let's go ahead and look at our top 5 teams in our AVCA poll. Texas, Louisville, Nebraska, they stay the same. USD stays put at 4 with a win over Pepperdine. They look solid. A little bit of a shaky 5-set win for the Toreros against Loyola Marymount, a team that just split last weekend against Long Beach State. So USD stays there. Purdue jumps from 11 to 5. And this is our time to talk about the Boilermakers. A 3-set win against Minnesota, and then a scary one on Sunday on ESPN for Purdue. They beat Iowa in 4. Ava Hudson, real deal. Is this just more validation that Dave Shondell loves coaching with a chip on his shoulder? Because at the Big Ten Media Days, he was not happy that there was not one player nominated to the all-team and there was not one coach that voted Purdue in the top 5.
Yeah, I think though that Dave realizes he's got to show some consistency here and the schedule now going into the Big Ten is going to give him a chance to really prove his point. You cannot take away how well his kids played for the coaching staff and the fans there in Purdue, but the long haul is what everybody's been going through the first 4 weeks here, and they've been playing competition after competition after competition in this top 15. And my goodness gracious, it has been something to see, and it's taken a little bit of a toll, not only on the coaches, but on the players. So as Purdue rolls into that, we'll find out, right?
Yeah, and Nebraska at 3, they had one of the wackier matches against Ohio State. It looked, according to everything on paper and how Ohio State played, you feel like the Huskers should have won that in 3. Instead, they needed to come from behind, win the 4th, win the 5th. OSU had, 45 combined attack and service errors. They looked like the Huskers against Stanford. And so Ohio State, let's look at 6 through 10 here so we can have a little bit of a wider scope. Look at this, 5, 6, 7, 8. All in the Big Ten, and then Stanford, who fell to Oregon in 3, sitting 9.
Yeah, and you wonder if Stanford really is good enough to be at 9. They've been up, they've been down, they've been up, they've been down. So I don't know, but the Big Ten schools, you can't argue with them right now. They scheduled this fall. They've played everybody. Penn State's the only one that we just don't know about. They've had a good.
Man, there must be some heavy duty construction outside my apartment. Can you hear that, Mick?
Nope.
Okay, good. So I'm glad you guys can't hear that.
No.
I want to talk. Go ahead,
keep going. I was saying Penn State is the only one that we really is untested, along with Purdue. Purdue showed some of their mettle. Penn State had that great weekend of wins over Oregon and Stanford. Now the grind starts to come in. So we want to watch Penn State. We want to watch Purdue, see if they can handle that. But boy, there are seven teams there in the Big Ten that are dominating the top 15 spots.
And before we talk about Texas, there were only 4 teams that survived the first weekend of Big Ten play without a loss, and that's Nebraska, Illinois, Purdue, and who else? Michigan, who did not crock into the top 25. They're sitting there at number 26, and of course had the big win, the first loss of the year for Penn State. But let's talk Texas, a team that just looked so out of sorts. Of course, when you have Paul Sunderland on the call, he's going to make you feel like they're even worse because he's so good, but very critical as a play-by-play commentator. So we knew every bad swing. We knew every Akana mess up, every time that Lauren Dooley was able to stand down. And in the second set, when they're up 17-11, Kansas was, you really feel like you need a Tom Brady kind of comeback. And if it's Logan Eggleston, you better believe it's going to happen. Despite the end of the second set with Coach Elliott and his frustration, do you want to start there with the challenge lost when he loses it, and or do you want to start with the big comeback?
Yeah, I don't know where you want to start with that. There's so many places in that match. First of all, the first thing that was evident is that Texas doesn't like to play in that Kansas facility. They seemed uptight coming out, and I don't know why they felt uptight. I mean, they've got cannons and cannons and more cannons. So it must be something about that facility. I've only played in that place once or twice, and they've remodeled it quite a bit. So I can't tell you about that, but that's the first thing I noticed. I love Texas talent. I mean, you've got to see it.
Yeah.
They're just pushing each other to get better every day out there. But I don't know why there's so many challenges and all of those things, and not as much confidence as I would expect from all of that talent to be shown not only by the players but the staff. I did think Eggleston had a breakthrough match in the way that she conducted herself attacking. She didn't try to swing for the home run every time she took something off, hit the open spot. Reminded me of Celso Colaci back in the day, the Brazilian player that would jump, look around, see the hole, and just snap it in there. And you never could defend him. But Eggleston really had a nice, smart match there. And I think that settled the Longhorns down.
Yeah, almost 30 kills. I feel like it all switched in the beginning of that third set when they started to feed her more and more from the Bic. She had the one off the ceiling that ended up being a bit of a momentum shifter. Big block off of Dooley's head. Also, I think that was about 9-6, 9-5. Ran away with the fourth. Wild big fifth set, 15-9 was the final score. I wrote down Eggleston front runner exclamation point in terms of for the National Player of the Year. What about you?
And Kansas did some things. Everybody's going to scheme against Texas this year, so they're going to get a chance to see some of this stuff. But they did some scheming where they would just send Dooley. They don't even watch the setter. Just go to the left side or just go to the right side. And for 2 sets, they guessed right pretty often. And that's why they got eight stuff blocks against Texas in the first 2 sets. That was pretty amazing to me. But then somebody started figuring this out, and they started giving the setters some information, and they were one-on-one a lot, and that's why Eggleston was really so good.
Okay, so we look at the top 10 here. Let's take a look at 11 through 15. And this is when the stuff starts to get wonky because there was a lot of big movement in the 10 to 20 range. Penn State falls out of the top 10. Pittsburgh stays put at 10. Then you've got Georgia Tech, who moved up from 13. Florida jumped down only 2 spots. They lost in 5 to a scrappy South Carolina team that had a tough stretch, 3 straight unranked ACC losses. Then South Carolina bounces back. They've had a couple big wins in a row. BYU sitting there at 15. Baylor smushed in the middle. They play Kansas this week, which is good. But all of those teams just below them, Mick, all had the chance. Arkansas lost to LSU. Oregon, they made the big jump, but just couldn't crack into the top 25. Rice and UCF and Western Kentucky all had 3-0 wins. But where do you sit in terms of this 11 to 15?
Well, I think the coaches don't know what to do with Pittsburgh. And I think, and maybe Baylor. Pittsburgh and Baylor are the 2 teams that we can't get a feel for. It seems like they're never really bad and they're never really good. They're just always right in there, and we're waiting to see if they come on or if the wheels fall off or what. So I think that's the coaches seem to not be able to move them around. Florida, I think we're going to see them up and down because of their youth. I mean, I love the freshman setter.
Alexis Stuckey, yep.
Yeah, my goodness, I think she's good, but she is a freshman. And so they're going to have their ups and downs, and I think the coaches know that. They'll go up, they'll go down. I didn't think the coaches gave LSU love. They played 3 matches last week. They beat Arkansas Wednesday, then they beat Kentucky Friday, then they lose to Kentucky the next day or Sunday. I mean, what more can you ask of LSU? And then they only get 46 points. Michigan has a good win, but that's their only good win, and they get 104 points. So is it a Big Ten bias or?
A little bit. Well, the thing with Pittsburgh, let's talk about them. They won in 4 sets against both North Carolina teams, UNC and NC State. But aside from that one Towson slip up, the only Pittsburgh loss is San Diego in 5. They swept Ohio State, right? They had a phenomenal stretch there where they went to Provo. They swept Utah State. That's a good team. They beat BYU and ended that road stretch. So I'm high on Pittsburgh. I'm thinking that they want to be slept on right now. For them not to move up and have Purdue jump over them and have Penn State fall out and no one else jump into the top 10 and Stanford stay put in front of them and Wisconsin stay put in front of them, I'd feel a little bit disrespected if I was on a Pittsburgh Panther coaching or team or fan base, anything like that.
I think they're top 7.
I agree. I do agree. Yeah. We're going to talk at the end about the teams that can win a championship. Pittsburgh's right on that fringe in my mind. I've got 7 teams that can right now, I say, without a major injury, they're going to potentially win. No one else in my mind can really get around there. Mick's going to have his in a little bit, but let's take a look at where Oregon and the rest of that company sit, 16 to 20. And why don't we open it up to all 25 here? Because you mentioned that Michigan and LSU were just on the outside. So we've got Washington, who came back from what was a very bumpy start to their non-conference season. They lost to Arkansas. They lost again to Pepperdine. But now they come back to 2-0 in conference play. Washington and Stanford are going to duel this week. Let's talk a little Pac-12.
Well, Are those the two best teams, or is Oregon the best team? I mean,
You're right. We don't know.
we're going to see Washington State if they're actually going to play and challenge now. They seem to be starting to nip at everybody. Utah's kind of fallen back away. They lost Maddie Robinson for a while. I don't know how long she's out, but that's her offense in number of points scored on a regular basis there. Colorado's had a couple of surprisingly nice wins, but some bad losses early. So you just don't know what's going on. And what about UCLA and USC? They just
not impressive.
I mean, it's like we're playing in an intramural league here. One night we beat somebody, and the next night they beat us.
Well, they played each other, right? And USC 1-4. There was that very cool Peyton Dewick DS block that happened where she was forced to play in the front row as a defensive specialist. She got the block to win the third set. But aside from that, UCLA almost not worth our time here because there are so many teams more deserving, like Marquette, who we haven't spent too much time talking about. We did a little bit of talking. We pumped up Marquette last week. I think they're criminally underranked here at 19 and playing in a conference that only Creighton can really pick up big wins in. That's going to be two teams that are just going to hang around in the late teens.
Well, Creighton scheduled, Marquette did not. They had a couple of good scheduled matches, but not tough enough. Go back to UCLA. The only reason we have them around is they drew 7,000 fans for that match with USC.
I love it. We need more West Coast love.
Hats off to them, but they need to win that when they get 7,000 in there.
You're right. Well, we need the fan. I mean, it's something that I was very disappointed in when I moved out to the West Coast to see that the fans were not even close to the Big Ten, because you've got the storied history. And I know this is a conversation for another day, but it's just one of those things where it's, come on, guys, a little bit more cumulative effort, right? From the broadcast departments, from the schools to generate buzz. Instead, you just go to the beach all the time and just go to your volleyball matches. That's all I'm saying. It's just me on a high horse yelling at fans.
We always said this, the Midwest gets dark at 5:30, nothing to do. So you go to a ball game at 7. You're still playing golf at 7 on the West Coast, and it doesn't get dark.
The waves are going to keep rolling till 8:30, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the problem there.
Well, Oregon's not going to get tested till October 9th against Washington. They've got the 2 Arizona schools this weekend. And, similar stuff with the Big East schools, but they're looking great. And we always have, a one keen eye on our girl Zimmerman, along with Nora Sis and company out in Omaha. Pepperdine dropped a little bit to 20. They lost on that tough road trip. BYU, they looked really strong at home. So that's one of those things where not many things are wrong if BYU can get a top 16 seed going into the tournament. How about this mixture here? Rice, Arkansas, UCF, and Western Kentucky. Who would you have taken out for Michigan or LSU if you do believe that they belong?
Absolutely none of those 4. Those 4 are absolutely worthy of top 25. The coaches are going to keep them from 20 to 25, unfortunately, because their schedule now is all interconference, and Rice.
You don't know that though. Arkansas, they lost to LSU, a couple more of those, and you might see LSU swap.
Well, I think Arkansas, that is correct. Arkansas has got to not be a pretender. They've got to be a doer. They got to do it every weekend. But of those others, Western Kentucky, Rice, all of those schools back there that don't have schedules now for the rest of the season, they're going to stay back there. But I know those coaches, they're still working to have those teams get better. So I don't want to play those teams in the first or second round of the tournament. I'll tell you that right now.
Well, let's give a little love. LSU with their first road ranked win since 2014, and then they come back and do it again a few days later, beating Arkansas and beating Kentucky. First home loss for South Carolina came the day before that they turned around and beat Florida. Arkansas did beat Ole Miss. They bounced back nicely. Let's talk a little AAC here before we shoot it over to our segments, because UCF at 24, they're still undefeated. Houston, who dropped that match to Texas, they beat him in the first set. Houston's 14th in RPI, and there's a great website that's called Fig Stats where you can pull up the live updating RPI numbers, folks, and that is the way to consistently stay up to date. Houston and UCF are going to be interesting because you might see 2 American teams in the NCAA tournament this year.
Well, and think about it, Todd Dagenais out at Central Florida has done a great job. They're going to the Big 12. Houston doing a great job. They're going to the Big 12. Cincinnati, usually on top of their game, almost always competitive. They're going to the Big 12, and then add BYU going to the Big 12. That's before Texas and Oklahoma get out of there. What a conference that's going to be next year.
It's gonna
So
be good.
let's watch all those teams this year and see how that's going to add up.
Well,
For
we don't
next
know
year.
if they're going to join before Texas and Oklahoma leave yet. That's all kind of muddled up in the air. I'm not sure the Big 12 is going to have them come before Texas and Oklahoma leave.
I kind of like to just put them in the shaker and shake them around.
The big 37, Mick. Let's talk a little bit segments. I want to congratulate both Ryan McGuire and John Cook. McGuire won his 500th with
Nice.
Baylor as they won against TCU. That's a good battle against Kansas coming up. John Cook won number 800 as Nebraska swept Michigan State before the loss to Ohio State. And then at Syracuse, don't sleep on the middle of the ACC. Louisville and Florida State, that looked a little one-sided, didn't it, on ESPN on Sunday? I think the top is heavy in the ACC, but Syracuse looked like a very serviceable team. They smoked Boston College in the 5th set. That's an 11-2 BC team. And Shemanova became the 2nd all-time kill getter in Syracuse history, which I love to see. Always fun seeing those records like that broken.
Well, you're right about that, because Boston College came back and then beat Duke later. So that whole middle of the ACC is going to start beating up on each other.
Okay, and then Marquette is off to their best start in a season since '97 after their 9th straight win. And lastly, I saw this one. Hawaii is 30-0 all time against UC Riverside as the Rainbow Wahine started the season 2-0. Mick, were you ever like 40-0 against someone?
We had a run when I was at Texas on Baylor where we beat them so many times.
But you never lost once?
I never lost once to Baylor. Yeah.
Okay, there it is. Just a big brother, little brother scenario.
Yeah, yeah. But we had a 37-3 record against Texas A&M, and we never lost at home against Texas A&M the whole time I was at Texas. So I remember that because the Aggies always used to yell at me, "Sit down, bus driver," all the time. So
there we go. We'll also keep an eye on UC Santa Barbara. They had a pair of 5-set thrilling wins on the road against San Diego and then a reverse sweep against Irvine. Plus the Cal Poly Mustangs swept Long Beach State. I got to see them in person, Mick. Tyler Hildebrand's crew is going to be just fine, but their serving melted down on them in the 4th set. I think they had 14 or 13 service errors in one set. And it was they had 10 aces in the 1st set and 10 service errors in the 4th set. They lost in 4 and then swept Bakersfield. So Cal Poly, Santa Barbara, Hawaii, the 3 teams picked to finish 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, not in that order, all 2-0 in the Big West. Let's have one more quick one. Who are the teams that you think can win it all? I'm going to read from Rodolfo, who go ahead and comment on YouTube. I know I feel weird yelling at you to comment on YouTube, but if you want to, you can. We're going to read a few of them out every episode. This time it's Rodolfo. Rodolfo says there are 4 teams that he thinks that can win it all. It's Texas's championship, but it's Texas, Louisville, Stanford, and Minnesota. Now, what Minnesota just did is hit 356 against Wisconsin, the highest against the Badgers since the 2019 national championship against Stanford.
I take Stanford out. I put Nebraska in, and Nebraska is not capable of winning it right now. But by the end of the season, I believe he will have this figured out, and he will have a chance to win simply because of the way they scheme and the way they can match up with people. I do not think Stanford is a Final Four team. I don't think they're top 4, but I would agree with the others for sure.
Yep. And I'm throwing in San Diego in that mixture. I'm going to, I mentioned there might be 6 or 7 that I have. I have San Diego and I have Washington, 2 teams that I think have experience enough to get them through some of those dog days of December. So that's going to be my list. I want to know from you fans at home. You could do it before this weekend. You could do it after with a little bit more love. Let me know who you think can win it all. How many teams? Because it's fun to kind of get that number, because sometimes it gets higher as the season goes on. Sometimes it gets lower, but that's all I have. Any final thoughts from this one?
Only that I like San Diego. Don't get me wrong. I would put them in there if they had a little bit more on the bench to come in. I watched when Edwards couldn't score this last weekend, and they really didn't have an answer for that if they had to replace her. And that's twice that's happened. I actually think that was caused by the setting more than Edwards not being able to score. But I think San Diego needs to develop their bench, and then maybe they could make a run to that top 4.
Well, everyone knows that these 10-week wars that are conference play, they will wear you down. There will be injuries. Players will have to sit out. So challenging the depth will be key. But let's go ahead and throw it to ourselves from the past. We chatted with Ellie and Matti McKissock, our second ever sister-filled interview. Joined now by the McKissock sisters, Ellie out in Gainesville, Florida, Matti over in LA. So happy to be with you guys. Thanks so much for joining us.
Of course.
Oh, yes.
So I want to ask, first off, in terms of positions, right? Ellie, you're a libero, back row. Matti, a setter, started at Georgia Tech. Whoever wants to answer first can. But when you guys started playing, was that your position, or were you kind of switched around a little bit? When did you find your specific spot?
I started as libero, and then my family didn't really know a lot about volleyball at the time. So we were like, oh, setter is how you're going to get scholarships. Because, I mean, if you're under a certain height, then everyone can be a DS. So there's a lot of them. So my dad was like, you should be a setter. And I was like, okay. So I tried it out for a few months, and I was like, okay, this is not for me. So then I played outside in high school for like a little bit. But yeah, pretty much libero my whole life.
Yeah, and for me, I always played setter. There was a high school setter that I thought was really awesome, and so I just decided I want to be like her, and just decided to be a setter and never looked back.
Okay, and so you mentioned, Ellie, that your parents aren't necessarily, and that's maybe a bit of a rare answer. So I'm curious, for all of the volleyball fans that are watching whose parents might not be the diehard volleyball knowledge side of things, what would be your biggest advice to them, and kind of how do you guys were able to manage going through club and figuring out all the big decisions?
Well, I think what happened with my parents was my sister was going through it when she was 13. It was like her Christmas present to be able to play club. And so my parents started to get to know more about the sports, and they just asked around. They saw like good parents at or good players at our school that were playing, and they were like, what are you doing? Like, how are you getting scholarships? How are you playing club? Like, how are you getting on the top teams? And what club should we go to? So they just asked other parents around our school like what they should do for us to succeed.
And then Matti, as the older sister, was there ever a moment where you're like, man, why don't you just play another sport, Ellie? Or were you really inclusive into the volleyball world?
Yeah, no, I was begging Ellie to play volleyball. She was playing basketball when I started, and she actually went out for her first club tryout and I was on the lowest team at our club, and she made like the top team right off the gate. And I was like, and I was so happy for her. And then she decided not to play. She was like, I don't like it. I just want to play basketball. And my parents and I were like, you don't realize how good you are. Come on, stick with it. And then the next year she went through with it and played. And I was like begging her to play and like peppering outside in the yard together and trying to like train her up. And sometimes it was fun for her. Sometimes I was too hard on her, and it was really fun.
Go ahead, Mick.
Well, I'm interested, as all players and especially setters, who do you model yourself after? Who do you look to kind of see what they're doing, and who do you try to model yourself after? And the same thing with the libero position. There are some pretty special people that have played that position also, but who do you guys look up to?
I would say Jordan Poulter. I mean, she's so great at setting. But I think leadership wise, since I've been in college, Tori Dilfer from Louisville, she has been like a great role model for me. I mean, she's such a great leader and person, and I really admire her and her faith. So like leadership wise, I would say her, and I know her more personally. So it's been easy for me to just ask her questions and things. But setting wise, they're both great. And I just kind of take things from all the top setters and things that work for me and things that don't. I think everyone's so different. So that's it for me.
All right.
Yeah, I think it's crazy. Like I was talking about this the other day, like going into college and having these people that you look up to, like CC McGraw and Kylie Murr, and now I'm friends with some of them, and they're commenting on my Instagram. And so I just think it's like so cool, like going into college and then like your role models that you've looked up to your whole life. Like even Jenna Hampton, she played in the Orlando area. So just like her being in my conference and stuff like that, just looking up to those people, and now you're like know them. So I think that's so cool. But
So here's
definitely those are my
here's a
team that
real hard question. Who's the best team that you've played against, each of you so far? Who's the team that has really given you the hardest time to compete and be successful against?
I have no doubt Louisville. I hate to say it almost, but they are such a good team, and I never got a win off them my whole 4 years at Georgia Tech, and they took us out in the tournament last year. They just play so clean and they play so together, and it's tough to beat that team. They're such a good team.
Yeah, I would say Louisville. They took us out last year as well. So
The whole family. Wow.
yeah. No, but they were definitely like a hard team to beat. They have really good defense. And so I think when you're hitting against like defense, it gets really tiring. And yeah, they play really clean. It was a really tough match. We played Wisconsin last week, and that was a battle as well. 17,000 people was definitely hard to play against. So that was definitely a really fun and historical match that I will never forget. So
let me jump in real quick. Was that the loudest crowd that you've ever been a part of? Obviously.
100%.
But even though they were in a basketball arena, did it kind of bring the same flair? I guess in the SEC, I used to cover Gators volleyball. It's a little different than playing in the Big Ten.
Oh yeah. It was really loud. Like sometimes we were talking after the game, you couldn't even hear yourself talk. So it was like, it was really loud. It was really hard to play against. So they did a really good job.
Go ahead, Mick.
Well, last question. You playing defense, you line up. Who's the hitter that hits the hardest ball at you?
This is truth time. We ask everyone this question.
That's right. Who makes your arms go numb? Who really hits that heavy ball? Some of them pop right off your arms. You control them right to the 3-meter line. There's other people that just absolutely numbs your arms.
Maddie, I see your face. I know you want to answer.
Oh, I don't have anyone in mind specifically, but I'm just thinking for her. Like, I don't know. I was like, have you played against Catherine Plummer?
I
know. We had a lot of Yassiana Presley's. I think that's what Kylie Murr said last year.
Yeah. That's always a good question that I like to throw out. And setting wise, who do you have to, who gives you the biggest problem as a blocker? You have to defend that right front, and they try to put somebody over you every time that can score. Who do you have the most trouble defending against there?
Everyone. There's no one specific that comes to mind, but it's definitely always a battle for me to not get tooled. So I always have to work on it no matter the hitter. So really just anyone.
How much time do you spend in practice on that?
Honestly, as a setter, you don't spend, at least in both the programs that I've been in, you don't spend as much time as you would think. Like, you're there to set, and I think that's the coach's focus. And if you can block, that's a plus. So most of the time I just work on setting, and like blocking is kind of not really as important, but I think it's definitely like important in a game, but sure, I don't think as much time as setting.
You know what happens, last thing, you know what happens in the game as the libero is everybody tries to keep the ball away from you. Mm-hmm. So how do you get contacts? How do you get contacts in practice? How many times do you actually get to touch the ball?
Well, during practice, we do designated passers sometimes. So we'll have like, this time we're serving this person and this person on both sides. So that helps me get reps during practice, and then drills as well. And then right now our serve receive looks a little bit different. We have our outside like right on the line, and then we'll have our DS, and then I'm taking a lot of the court. So, and we'll even like on the toss or on serve, we'll say shift, and then I'll try to shift where they're.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, but I got my hardest hitter. It's definitely Stephanie Samity.
Yes.
Samity does have a heavy ball, no question about that.
That's a great answer.
Well, that's pretty good. Thank you.
I feel like the Gators play Minnesota every single year anyways. So that was one of those things where you guys were always matched up. I want to ask you about, the childhood kind of, once you figured out volleyball was going to be your sport, Ellie, after basketball, what was the dynamic right between you two? Was there, was it Maddie teaching you how to be a little vocal? Obviously as a setter, Maddie, you kind of have to be more vocal on the court, and then libero, not so much. What was it like for you two?
Maddie would come to my tryouts and she would be like, Ellie, you have to talk louder. She was always pushing me in the gym, outside the gym. I was definitely a little bit more timid because I'm very outgoing, but when I'm uncomfortable, I get quieter. So during tryouts, I didn't know anyone there and I was really quiet. So she was definitely helping me push me on the sidelines and stuff.
Yeah, I would say it was definitely fun working together, and we always pushed each other to be better. And we played high school together, which was really fun. And I think that is where we grew like pretty close, but it was also challenging because Ellie was an 8th grader on varsity and I was like a sophomore at that point. So I was just trying to help, and it was fun, but we were both really competitive and we tried to make each other better.
Was there ever a world where you wanted to get to the same school, or did you guys kind of want to, mold your own path?
Well, Ellie had a lot more options than me going into college. And so I would have loved to go to Florida at the time. But I decided to go to Georgia Tech, and it worked out beautifully for us. And yeah, it was never really an option, but it would have been cool. But yeah, I think we had our time together in high school, and that was really fun. So yeah.
Go Gators. That's where I went to school. And obviously, getting coached by Mary Wise and by Michelle Collier are, two of the most unique experiences. And I want to ask you first, Maddie, we talked with Shelby Martin last year, your predecessor at setter at UCLA, and she's talked about Michael Seeley, and I want to hear about his style. But first, what's the biggest change in languages, right? Going from all of the Brazilian and the Spanish in Atlanta, and then now I'm assuming a lot of English in LA.
Yeah, it's so different. And the culture here is completely different than what it was at Georgia Tech. They're both great, but just very different. I would say, yeah, I mean, they're both super different, but they're both great. And like definitely a lot more English here, but I love both of my experiences, and Georgia Tech definitely helped me grow and become the setter I am today, to even be able to be here at UCLA. So I'm really thankful for them and that program.
Yeah, we talked to Bergman and Brambilla last year, and they said that very little English was spoken on the court. And so that's what I'm referring to there. But for you, Ellie, working under such a legend, and especially a woman coach who is so composed, and we watched her in Wisconsin last weekend, and she can blow a lid every once in a while. Are there any good Mary Wise stories for us?
Oh yeah, well, she doesn't really. She just gets you really hyped. So sure, her main line is, if we like run out of timeouts or something, she's like, "I'll see you when we win this game." Like the next time I see you is like when we're gonna win this game. So she never gives up on us, and she always has faith that we're gonna win the game, even if we're down or whatever. And that was definitely what happened in Wisconsin. We were down coming out of that timeout. She was like, "Next timeout, if they call a timeout, that's when I'll see you. Like after we are up, and we make them call a timeout." So.
And you two have never faced each other, right, in college?
No,
we were close last year.
Almost.
So yeah, if it happens this year, are you giving up each other's secrets to your teammates? Are you saying like, all right, Maddie can't guard line? No, you're keeping it composed, keeping it locked in.
Oh yeah, definitely. We're gonna be like wanting to beat each other and have bragging rights.
Well, I can't wait for it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us.
You.
For Ellie and Matti McKissock, McKaylee, I'm Daniel Gillman. This is Six Rotations.